Alrighty, folks, we are back. Thank you very much. We are kicking off a section, module 75206, which is page 601. Okay, thank you for everybody's patience, and we're going to go ahead and kick it off. As most of you know, and if anybody's watching this on a pre-recorded issue, you don't worry about answering back in because you're just obviously watching the video. Okay, we are going to kick it off tonight, folks. We're going to be at site-specific EHS plans or environmental safety and health plans. And it is going to be page 6.2, 6.1. Okay. If anytime you see, and we all know it nowadays, anytime you see ESH, SHE, EHS, HS&E, however you look at it, we all know we're talking about the same thing, which is a suite of environmental safety and health. And of course, we're talking about the three agencies, right? Environmental being the EPA, safety being OSHA, and health being NIOSH. And of course, all the agencies kind of work. They kind of intermingle and work in the same spectrum to protect the public, and then of course protect us in the workplace, right? So as we've talked about through multiple sessions. Okay, so let's go ahead and kick it off. Let's talk a little bit about it, and let's talk about the pre-bid planning a little bit. Okay, and let's start with the introduction at 1.0.0. And basically, what are we talking about, right? When we're talking about a health and safety plan, or a site-specific health and safety plan, we're basically talking about being able to go ahead and write and memorialize all of the safe practices that we're going to follow, the hazard assessments that we've conducted in the facility, in that work site, basically all the hazards that a competent person or competent people have determined that may be recognized hazards in the workplace that could cause serious injury, illness, or fatality, and basically taking and seeing what controls that we're going to put into place in order to make sure that we control a hazard. Okay, so let me go back to one thing, folks, really quickly. We talked about yesterday the hierarchy of controls, and let me go back to it one more time. Okay, anybody, just really quickly, since I'm on this page right here, I've sent most of you the link. But if for any reason, if you need the link, if you need to get to YouTube, do one of two things. Okay, OSHA Training New Orleans. Okay, I think if you do that, let's see. That's our channel, and hopefully I think we come up, there you go, we come up right at the top. Okay, and as you see here also, that's an informational video that a lot of you have watched, right, for the NCCER. If you want to share it, please by all means feel free to share it as well. Okay, it kind of looks like our view count's going up, which is great. And then also you can do this. I've sent you the link, but if you're ever on your phone and you don't know the link, just Google, or either go to Google or go to YouTube and just type in NCCER CSST. And then when you search it, basically there you go. Those are all of our modules. You see it there. There's our channel, okay, OSHA Training New Orleans. And as you see, we've begun to standardize, just like safety standardized, right? We've begun to standardize the way we have them listed. So you'll see all the safety technology. It starts now with safety technology, the module number that it is, and then our name, and then the NCCER CSST. Okay, so there's all your safety technology books. And then all your field safety books, folks, are here. And then you'll notice them that they'll look like this. Okay, so we're adding more and more training materials, folks. We're adding more modules that we had pre-recorded that we're doing a little bit of editing on. And actually, over the course of the next 3 to 4 weeks, as we wrap up about the next 3 weeks, as we wrap up all of these modules in this book, and then we should have 100% of these online for you. Okay. One last thing, also, we're sending out a checklist. And that checklist, folks, just so everybody knows what it's going to be, is going to be a checklist of all modules, all 27 modules, and also the 15 evaluations. So that way, whenever someone does a, let me see if I can pull one up for you really quickly, okay? I think this is one right here. Let's see. No, sorry, that's not it. Let's try it again. Okay, for some reason, I'm not, let's see, NCCER, CSST, and okay, for some reason, sorry about that. I'm not able to pull it up. I'm going to pull up the survey. It's all it is a checklist that we've done, and all it is a checklist that we've done. And I'll go ahead and pull it up. Actually, here it is right here, folks. Sorry about that. I found it. Okay, here you go. So basically, this is what you're looking at. And let me convert it really quickly just to a PDF while we're on the line. And then that way you'll kind of be able to see what it looks like. Let's see. Let's try it again now. Okay, here you go, folks. Sorry about that. I had to convert it really quickly and then find it. This is what it's going to look like. I just want you to get a look at it. Basically, this is what we're sending you. This is a PDF of the NCCER, the end of course evaluations for the 15 evaluations that we'll do. Okay. And then also, in addition to the evaluations, we're also going to be sending out one that looks similar to that as well. That's going to have the 27 modules. Okay. It's going to have the first book and then it's going to have the second book on it. It'll be 2 columns, 1 column on the left and 1 column on the right. And the reason we're doing it like that, 18 for one module, 9 for the 18 for the second book with the book that we're in now, and 9 for the first book, for the field safety book. And the reason we're doing it like that, folks, is so that way as you go working through, you can go ahead and just check off as you go. That way you know you've got 100% completion and you're ready to test, okay? That way you can check off the 15 modules that you've seen the videos for it and that you've also seen the examples that we've been sending out. And then in addition to that, also the 9 modules in the field safety book and then the 18 modules in the safety technology book. That way you have all of them and then you know that, that you've adequately prepared for the test as well, okay? All right, great. Any questions on that? Or are you guys okay with that? Okay, good. Okay. All right. So moving on. Let's go back to the PowerPoint now, and then and like I said, those are the checklists. And let me go back now to this I'm going back to Google, folks. Okay, and all I'm doing is I'm looking at for the hierarchy of control, safety controls. Okay, so what a Google do is hierarchy of controls, safety examples, basically. And I'm just going to my images here. Okay, and we talked about this last week. Let me look really quickly, folks. I just want to pull up the 3. Um, let's just go ahead and go with this picture here. Okay, so let's see. Let's go with this picture here, and basically all I want to do is I want to concentrate on these 3 here. Okay, folks. So basically, let's see. Give me 1 second. Let me just snap this, and then we'll kind of fix it. Okay, so let's see. Okay, these are the 3 that I primarily want to concentrate on here, okay? So basically, anytime we look at a hazard, right, and as we talk throughout the night tonight, we'll be talking about a lot of hazard identification. And basically, competent persons have to determine competent qualified persons, what hazards exist, and then competent persons basically have to determine what controls are going to be put in place. And the reason the competent person has to determine what controls are going to be put in place is because the competent person has the authority to make changes in the workplace in order to protect the employee. Okay, so here you go. So we're going to use these three every time that we talk about a hazard tonight. We're going to talk about engineering at the hazard first, administrating at the hazard, and then PPE being our last line of defense. Okay, and then let me go back to before we do that. Let me just go back one more time to the website, and then this is what you saw me cut out, which was the substitution elimination. What happens is that now a lot of health and safety professionals and environmentalists have determined and said that, okay, in addition to the 3 that we've normally practiced, we should also be substituting maybe less harmful materials and or eliminating the hazard. But that's what we normally do anyway. Okay, as you saw in last week's, we talked about asbestos insulation, and I showed you an example of that. Okay, that substituting for a less harmful material like fiberglass, which is often done, or some type of spray foam insulation would be an example of a substitution, and just outright getting rid of the insulation altogether, which is not a possibility, as we know, right? With the condensation and evaporation. But eliminating it altogether would be elimination, right? But they're both considered engineer control as well. Okay. All right, great, folks. So let's go ahead and move on and let's talk a little bit. Let's get back to 1.0.0. And basically what we're talking about is general safety policies, right? They're just not enough to cover unusual jobs or jobs that are out of the ordinary. So basically what OSHA says And what OSHA says and health and safety professionals say is that we have to customize our policies for each particular work site. Okay, so what are we talking about? Name of this module, right? A site-specific EHS plan or health and safety plan, right? So, and basically, what do we know about it? Well, it's going to vary in size. How big is the project? Is the project that we're going to do, are we just forming and pouring concrete? Or are we doing a complete rehab? Are we doing a complete turnaround or shutdown? So just depending, are we just going to do maybe site prep and doing some land leveling, but we're out of there before any equipment and utilities start coming in? Okay, so depending on what the work site is and what hazards exist when we're initially there or while we're there throughout our task is going to determine often how complex the health and safety plan is going to be. Okay. All right. So at minimum, basically, the safety and health plan is going to have to have certain provisions, right? And at a minimum, it's going to have this. It's going to have a HAZCOM program, hazardous communication. We're talking about chemicals, right? It's going to have a hazardous communication program. It's going to have an incident prevention program. So basically an incident and accident prevention program in order to help train and educate employees on how to minimize the risk of negative impact or injuries or illnesses, okay, or fatalities. It's also going to have inspections. So basically we're talking about worksite audits, walkthroughs, and inspections is what we're talking about. Grounded electrical systems, right? So if it's permanent power, the panels have to be grounded. If it's temporary power, those temporary panels are going to be grounded. Okay, generators often are going to be grounded as well, and different fuel sources will also be grounded. So just in case to prevent from hazards from like electrostatic, from like electricity or static electricity or lightning or anything. Okay. In addition, also record keeping, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about our OSHA 300 log, our 300 annual summary, and our 301 incident report forms is what we're talking about. And as we get closer to the back of this book, I think it's like chapter 15 or 16, we'll do some extensive talking about reporting and recording, the OSHA 300 log, not just what's in the book, but also off of the OSHA 12-page booklet, which is what I prefer to train off of. Okay. Also, in addition to that, we're going to be talking about PPE and then housekeeping as well. So at a minimum, we're going to be talking about that. And then if we have any specific procedures, right, any hoisting, rigging, demolition, and then we're going to also add those confined spaces, right, scaffold work. I had somebody that we spoke about some scaffold concerns on a job that they're going to, a new job that they're going to, that they're going to be doing more scaffold work than they normally do off of scaffolds. So just depending on what the specific hazards are as well. Okay, and basically that site safety plan, what has to happen is that it has to be coordinated with other groups, right? Who does it have to be coordinated with? It's got to be coordinated with the client, with general contractors, maybe with other subcontractors and contractors that are going to be on the site, right? And all this, and we need to make sure that we have clear direction before the job even starts, right? Before we even start putting employees out there and allowing employees to work and being at risk, we need to make sure that we have our health and safety plan done and that we're working in conjunction with, like I said, the controlling entities or the general contractor or prime contractors and other contractors as well. Okay. And then certain OSHA programs also, they have strict rules, right, for safety coordination to make sure that site safety plans, they have to be coordinated with local emergency response. A lot of times I tell people if the job is big enough, if the job is big enough or if there's significant risk, especially like let's say industrial construction or even commercial construction, letting EMS know, the fire department, right, medical services, hospitals, maybe not as much hospitals, but more the medical services as far as EMTs and fire department and police departments, that you're going to be working there, working with the community leaders, right? Working with community emergency responders so that they understand that we're going to be working in that area. So if there is any mishap, that hopefully we'll be able to have some additional assistance. Okay. And also we can give them some guidance as well as to what the work process is going to entail. So let's talk a little bit about the pre-bid planning, right? So pre-bid planning, planning safety into that job. It's just as important as it is planting materials and the work practices and how we're going to get jobs done. Okay, so nowadays you're starting to see more and more that pre-planning for safety is coming into account. How many fire extinguishers will we need? right? Do we need a fire brigade on this facility? Are there any significant risk of fires or struck by or fall hazards or excavation hazards or above ground or underground utilities that we need to be concerned about? Okay, so all that will come into play. All right, and basically what happens during that pre-bid is that it's got to be done for every job. So, if we're planning to go do work on a refinery at Valero, let's say in St. Charles, we need to have a site plan or at least enough of a site plan ready for that pre-bid and then continue finalizing as we get there or before employees are actually exposed to the harm. If we're going to, let's say, a manufacturing facility to do a build out or something, and then we have to do the same thing there. So they're all going to be specialized and they're all going to be tweaked to their particular environment. Okay. And then planning is going to identify certain potentials of losses, right? Or what kind of losses are we talking about? Primarily people, right? Employees, contractors, the general public, anybody who might be at risk. Also, buildings and structures, right? Now we're talking about property, equipment, and then also our environment, right? What emissions are we putting out there? Is there any risk of any hydrocarbons or any other chemicals being released into the ground or the water, right? Any type of water sources around. So items and then wildlife, plant life, items that we need to be concerned about when it comes to the environment as well. And then pre-job safety planning, right? It should follow certain format. First of all, step one, first and foremost, we have to identify the hazards. Okay, absolutely have to identify the hazards in step one. Then we have to evaluate the consequences that we may be exposed to or how bad the hazards could be. And then we're gonna go ahead and rank them by those hazards by the risk and calculate our risk, and then ultimately control and minimize our prioritized hazards as well, right? So we're going to prioritize them by the necessity. Back when we started off, and I want to say it was module 1 or 2 of this book, we talked about, and you'll see in the video that it showed a risk matrix. Also in the evaluations, you're also receiving a risk matrix there in modules 1 and 5. So you'll see that there'll be talk about calculating probability, severity, and consequences. Okay, in order to come up with these formulas and these numbers to see what we need to address first. And then, so during the hazard identification stage, right? Let's talk about what some of the components are during that identification stage. Well, we got to identify the site and the layout, right? Where's the work site we're working? What's the layout of the site? The scope of work that we're going to do. Are we doing any excavations? Are we doing any trenching? Are we doing any hot work? Are we doing any confined space work? Are we doing any work around energized utility lines? Okay, pipelines under pressure. So all that's got to be taken into consideration. Also, in addition to that, client and contract requirements. What requirements has our contractor, our client, put on us, right? What about regulatory permits and requirements as well? What requirements are we obligated through the government? And then also what type of permitting systems do we have to go through? Are we going through any building permits, utility permits, okay? And then it's essential, right, that we don't miss any important aspects of the operation. So it takes time to do this pre-bid, folks. So what's the best way to do it? Go through a pre-check list, right? Or not only doing a pre-check list, but you can also, and a lot of times in the legal industry, you'll hear it called a due diligence list. Okay, so let me show you really quickly what I'm talking about. You can just take a safety audit checklist, right, and then personalize that safety audit checklist to what your work environment is gonna include. So let's see. I'm looking for one particular one to show you right now. I think this is it. Okay, so here's an example, right, of an audit checklist, folks. This is an Excel spreadsheet, right? And I'll send everybody these links as well, just so you know, and you have them, okay? But there's different hazards when it comes to general environmental controls, right? We're talking about hazardous materials. There's checklists that we can go through, right? Our PPE, okay? necessity to have first aid or medical on site. So here's all different. This is actually from a military one that's very in depth, folks. But there you go, right? A lot of OSHA standards that you see on your left hand side. Most of these are general industry. There will be some construction ones as well. Okay, so we have to comply with so many different issues, even if it is a general industry number, folks. If it's a 1910, which most of us know is general industry, construction standards start with a 1926, but they're going to be very little difference. Most, like I said before, most standards do not contradict each other. However, there may be some slight difference or some variation, but most of them do not contradict each other. Okay. All right. And then what's the next thing we're gonna do? We're gonna assess that risk, right? We're gonna do a risk assessment on the facility, and we're gonna determine, hey, we're gonna go ahead and break the items down in different types of risk that we may be exposed to, and things that we're gonna want to check and make sure is, hey, what kind of catastrophic hazards are we gonna have? What are we talking about? We're talking about catastrophic being loss of life, right? A fatality. And then also, what kind of critical injuries, illnesses might we have? And I'm talking about severe injuries or illnesses or severe property damage as well. And then it could be marginal. It could be something like a minor illness, an injury, or some property damage. Negligible, basically being low hazard, okay, but or nuisance, right? But still, of course, still a hazard as well. Okay. And then the next step that we're going to do to determine is the potential for an event occurring. Okay. The best way, and these are mostly insurance terms, folks, and NCCR uses them as well. But a lot of these tend to be insurance terms. And basically, this is how you can rank it. And it's called the ABCD, right? It's A is going to be likely. How likely is it going to happen? Can it happen now? Can it happen very soon from now, right? Let's say a fall hazard, for example. If employees are working off of aerial lifts, let's say. Second of all, probably, it would be like A is, is it likely to happen now, right, or very soon? B would be, it might happen in maybe in a considerable amount of time. It could probably happen. C is that it could possibly happen, and then D is it's unlikely to happen. So just dependent, and at that point, we're assessing on what the probability is of that negative impact happening. All right, so let me give you an example. If we have employees up on an aerial lift every day, all day long, we could get into an A for the risk of a fall or an electrocution, right? If we have employees up there, maybe, let's say once a week, it could wind up being a B or C. And if we know they're only going to be up there about once or twice a month, well, it could be a D. It doesn't mean that the consequence is going to be any less. It's just that the probability is that it's probably less likely to happen because there are less employees that are in that potential hazard. Okay. All right, and then if you notice at the bottom, folks, you'll see a risk matrix, and you'll see on the top is the consequences, on the left is the probability. All right, and it goes on to talk about, and you'll see. So, so at this point, what happens is that if the probability is an A, and the consequence is a 1, it's probably going to be the most risk. Okay, but what we've done with this is I've got it for you in an evaluation. Let me pull it up for you really quickly, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now here you go, right here, right? A risk matrix. So depending on the likelihood of it happening, okay, the probability, right, of how it's going to happen, and the severity of the consequence. Okay, so we actually, instead of doing A, B, C, D, and 1, 2, 3, 4, we've done from 1 to 5 and 1 to 5. So the more likely it's going to happen, the least likely a 1. The more likely or the more frequent, that an employee is at risk, it's going to go all the way up to a 5. And if you notice here on the severity, how bad can the consequence be? Is it starts off at a 1 and it goes all the way up to 5 with critical. So if we have employees that are at great risk very often, and the risk could be very significant, they'll be the highest risk that you can on this table, which would be a 25. Okay, and then the less they're on it, let's say that it's high risk because it could fall from an elevated height of, let's say, 120 feet from area lift, but they're only going to be up there twice during the whole project. The likelihood could be very low, so they may be somewhere around right here. Okay, Or it could be, that we're using, most employees don't go over 6 feet on a ladder. So we know that the severity could be much lower, maybe around a 2 or a 3. But employees are working on ladders all day long. So we could put us right here around that 10 to 15 mark, or 8, 12, 10, 15 mark. Okay. So just dependent. And a lot of it is, this is qualitative. It's a quantitative calculation, right? We're using numbers to quantify it, but it's qualitative in our opinion of what the likelihood is, of our organization's opinion, right? Of what the likelihood is and what the severity could be. Okay. But what we do want to do, even though it's our opinion of our organization, we do want to be uniform on how all of us as representatives for our organization determine what the quantity of risk is. Okay. And what the quantity of severity is as well. Okay. All right, great. So let's go ahead and move on. And then 2.3, right? We're talking about hazard control. We have to make sure that in this program, we're going to go ahead and ensure that we have proper safeguards to minimize those hazards, right? So, we want to, and like we said, we definitely going to go ahead and quantify these hazards by whether they're moderate, minor, negligible. They're going to have to be addressed, right? Regardless of how small they are. And what are the three primary controls that we talked about? Okay, it's going to be engineer controls, it's going to be administrative controls, and then it's going to be PPE. Those are going to be the three primary protections. Okay, if you note here in what NCCR and section 2.3.0, right, of this safety technology book, you'll see that in order of preference, the controls include, and they actually throw in a fourth here, if you notice, engineering controls, right, or substitution to eliminate that hazard. Guarding or isolation. In my opinion, that's still an engineer control, because we're using a guard or we're isolating. So we're using an actual control, a physical control or barrier, to still try to engineer the hazard out. Okay, so I would count both of those as one category. And then administrative controls, things like training our employees, right? Procedures that we follow, signs, alarms, instructions, and then personnel rotation as well. Like, let's say if we're rotating employees in and out, because there may be a lot of noise hazards, or there may be a chemical hazard or thermal hazard like heat stress or cold stress. Okay, just to give you an example of some few. Okay, so we always want to make sure that we run through every hazard that we have, and those three examples. So let me go ahead and show you, since we're talking about that, let me go ahead and show you two examples of that, right? So let's say, let me go back to the pipe insulation first, okay? Let's say we're taking a unit, right, like this, and let's say we're gonna take some pipes and we're gonna remove insulation, right? Well, we know that, we're going through a turnaround. We know that the hazard in those pipes is asbestos, right? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do some remediation first. So what's going to happen? That the refinery's determined that, hey, we're going to get rid of the insulation in this pipe since we're going in to service this pipe, right? Let's say this, whatever, two pipes in the middle here, right? Well, the first thing we're going to do is try to engineer out the hazard. So what are we going to do? We're going to try to eliminate insulation altogether. We can't. So we'll go to a less harmful substance like fiberglass insulation. So as we remediate, we're going to have to be really careful as we remove and remediate the insulation. But when we go back with new insulation, we're going to go back with a less hazardous product, right? Going back with fiberglass insulation. So now what are we looking at? Now we're looking at an engineering control. Okay. And then second of all, if anybody's ever noticed when asbestos insulation or roofing is being removed, that often an employee is put there with a hose to spray a hose. So let me show you. It's called the wet method. First of all, we're gonna train employees. That's administrative. Okay, and then what's going to happen is that we're going to continue to spray. We're going to continue to spray. And let me show you an example. Okay, something like this, right? Where employees may be spraying down while other employees are breaking or pulling off, either stripping lead off of our walls, or let's say asbestos. And what it is, it's called the wet method. We're using a hose in order to drop all the particulates to the ground into wherever we're going to capture them, right? This being some kind of contamination pool, vacuum them up, whatever the case is, a HEPA filter. And it's so that we don't have those hazards airborne. Okay, so administrative can be like I said, having the employee do the hosing. Okay, and then also, like I just said, also is also only allowing authorized employees to be in that area, and then training. Okay, those are all administrative. And then what's left is we're going to be in respirators, right? Then we're going to be in some type of either air purifying respirator or air supplied respirator, and our PPE in order to protect ourselves so that we're not exposed to asbestos hazards. Okay, so there you go: engineering, administrative, and then PPE, right? So let's use another example now, and let's use welding. Let's use hex chrome. These are just some forms that I know where they are, so I just want to find them really quickly. Let's see, and then I'm going to show you. Let's see, welding fumes. Let's do welding fumes. Okay, so here's an example, right, of an employee welding, right? All right, so here's actually I want to use one with ventilation. Let's see. For anybody who's not familiar with what I'm doing, I'm actually typing in what I want. I want an OSHA fact sheet. Okay, OSHA fact sheet on welding. And I want the file that I want is I'm telling it the file type that I want is a PDF. Okay, that's what I'm doing. And I did an earlier training on that. And if you look at it, you'll be able to find it in there. I've done it multiple times, and it shows that we'll do it. We'll end up doing it again to show everybody how to do advanced searches. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so let's go back. I'm just gonna have to do this one, folks. So sorry about that. Um, okay, so let's say that here we have this employee, right? And this employee is welding. Well, as the employee is welding, we can try to engineer out the hazard by using a less toxic chemical, right? We can try to, instead of using lead, let's say like we used to, right? Or even some SARs may still have lead in them. Okay, we may want to go to something less hazardous. Well, what happened? They started going to stainless steel, and now we have the risk of hex chrome, right? So they still continue to try to find less hazardous chemicals to use in the welding process and the types of pipe that we're working on. Like perfect examples, like I said, stainless steel on pipes. We now have a risk of hex chrome with employees. Okay, so those are engineering hazards where we may go to all of a sudden maybe threaded pipe in some situations where we don't have to weld. Right, perfect example how we can try to engineer out some of the hazards, but it's not always possible. Not everything can be threaded. Much of it's going to have to be welded. Okay, so first we try to engineer it out. Second of all, we try to administrate it out. How do we administrate it out? Well, we could also engineer it out to where we put an exhaust fan here, let's say, right? Well, if we take an exhaust fan and we use it to extract, as long as the smoke, we want to make sure that the employee positions themselves where the employee is not between the extraction fan and the weld, okay? Because this way they're either going to be crosswind like they are now from the weld, or if they get on this side and stand over here of this sheet, they would be upstream from the extraction. Okay, or they can turn around, and if they were standing on the other side, they'd be downstream of the downwind of the extraction, so they would be right where the fumes are being extracted into. Okay, so the extraction fan itself would be an engineer control. Having an employee position themselves in the right place so that they're not exposed to the fumes, that would be administrative, and then of course the PPE that the employee has on now. Okay, so that's a perfect example of how we can use all three in both different processes. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and move on. Right. Okay, so different situations that we'd be talking about in a site specific safety plan. All right, if you roll over to page 6.4, we'll be talking about the site location and the layout, like we talked about, right? We want to talk about and figure out, hey, where are we going to be? What site location and layout are we going to be in? All right, we want to see what kind of traffic patterns. Is this on a highly trafficked road? Are there a lot of moving either vehicles, either roadworthy vehicles or construction, right? Non-roadworthy vehicles that employees may be exposed to hazards. Are there a lot of cranes, scaffolds, tracos, backhoes? Okay, so different street graders, right? Just different types of equipment that they may be exposed to. Also, we want to know what hazards are there that we may be adjacent to. So possible hazards that we might be exposed to, first and foremost, often is going to be utilities, right? Do we have water lines, right? Lines under pressure for water. Do we have electricity in the area, AC or DC, overhead power lines, underground power lines? What about gas lines? Do we have any natural gas? Do we have any other gas buildup there? Right? Do we have any H2S hazards there or methane buildups there? What about, and same thing for sewer systems, right? What about, do we have any sewer system hazards there which may pose biological or chemical hazards? And then also, do we have any utilities or any fiber optic lines? Okay. So I showed you this in one of the previous editions. I'll show it to you again. Anybody who's not familiar, before we dig, right? We're all familiar that we must call 811, right? Okay. So what I'm gonna do is I'm doing 811 color coding, and I want to go ahead and show you. And here you go. Here are images, okay, of the different color codes for what somebody comes in paint. So if you ever see somebody like this come in paint at your facility, at your work, or your home, or in your community, and these are the markings that you'll see. Here are the different markings that you'll see right here, and these are the color codes for the utilities. When the companies come out, they'll either use small flags or they'll use eco-friendly paint, and those are the colors that they'll mark, and that basically tells you what is what, okay, in your workplace. I mean, excuse me, in wherever the lines are being marked, whether it's the workplace, whether it's your home, or just the general public. Okay. All right, great. Also, what else do we want to identify? Well, we want to identify the scope of work that we're doing, right? So we want to identify any high hazard work, especially. Are we going to be doing any blasting? And I'm on page 6.5, folks, for anybody who's not aware. We're going to be doing any blasting, any excavations, any demolition, any work at extreme heights, any work in confined spaces, any work over water. And then we're going to be handling any type of hazardous chemicals, right? Like asbestos, chemicals, hazardous waste, let's say, or any type of other regulated hazards or substances, right? A lot of times you'll hear the term seaborne. Let me go ahead and show this to you. It's more in the military than anything else. Is where you, well, not more, but that's where you tend to see it. And here you go. And this is what it stands for right here, folks. It's seaborne, and it's basically different sources of energy, as it is the four different sources of energy. A lot of times, also, this will fall under the weapons of mass destruction as well. And you're looking at chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. Okay, so those are your four sources of energy that make up your seaborne suite. Okay, sometimes you'll see it like that, folks, and sometimes you'll see it spelled. Let me put it in the search bar so you can see it. Let me see if images. You'll see all big ones except for the E sometimes. So you'll either see it all caps or you'll see this, just like that. Okay, they both mean the same thing. Okay, and like I said, those are your four basic categories of your weapons of mass destruction. Okay, but also think about it, right? How many times? Let me know out there if you've been exposed to and not exposed to, excuse me, on a work site that's had, how many of them have had at least two, three, or four of those? So just shoot me a message. Tell me if you've been, in an area, of course, chemicals, right? What about biological hazards, right? Bodily fluids, wildlife, plant life, right? What about, radiological and then nuclear as well? Okay. Yeah, good. Yeah, a couple of you, right? There you go. Three and the four, right? So yeah, absolutely. And then if you get around like wastewater treatment plants, you get around reactors, you get around RF or antenna towers, right? You get around nuclear power generation. So absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Okay, good. All right, so let's move on, right? And then of course we have topics like personal health and safety, right? And then we're going to be talking about also what type of PPE do we need for this that's been identified for this workplace, right? Do we need hard hats, safety glasses, gloves, hearing protection, boots, and then any type of specialized equipment? Do we need any type of fire retardant clothing, any type of chemical resistant clothing or aprons? Do we need any safety harnesses or fall gear? Do we need any debris or personnel nets? Do we need any type of respiratory protection? Okay. Do we need, as far as PPE, do we need it for biological, radiological? So it won't only be these types of PPE, but it'll also be broken down for the particular hazard that we need it for as well. Okay. So we might need nitrile gloves, we might need neoprene or butyl gloves, depending on the chemical that we're dealing with or biological agent. Or we may need Kevlar gloves, right, or cotton gloves or leather gloves, just depending on what hazards are associated that we've identified that we need to have PPE for. Okay. And then, of course, safety coordination, right? We have to coordinate with the client, like we said, other contractors, emergency services. In addition to that, like we said, we're going to coordinate for the primary essentials that we talked about, right? And then we're going to add a few more. So what about site security, right? Do we need security access to get in and out of the facility, or does the facility have to be secured just daytime or 24 hours a day? Vehicle and pedestrian traffic, right? What considerations do we have to make? Is our construction job going to affect the public roadways? Also, what about the vehicle and pedestrian traffic on our site itself, on our facility itself, where we're working? Okay, and then of course communications and different forms of communication, whether it be cellular, PA systems, email, phone, whatever the case may be, right? Memos, daily activity reports, or whatever. Um, Audits, and then waste disposal, emergency response, work permitting systems, whether it's hot work, confined space, high altitude, it could be rig, crane lift plans, okay? And then critical lifts also for cranes. And anybody who's familiar with what normally is a critical lift, we've talked about crane and rigging a few times already. Anytime we exceed 75% of either the crane or the rigging, either one, it doesn't matter, we normally go into a critical lift plan. And then anytime we do tandem crane operations, and let me show you what I'm talking about. I know most of you know what I'm talking about, but I'm talking about basically more than one crane. And I'm talking about something like this, where we're using multiple, one or more cranes to pick up an item. Anytime we're using more than one crane, it'll automatically be a critical lift plan, because both or more crane operators need to know what everyone is doing, okay, and how it's going to be done and how it's going to be communicated, okay. And not only that, also make sure that they have their designated channel. If you're going to have radio, they're going to have their designated channel as well. Okay, we should be walking over them with safety or other operations in that area. Okay. All right, good. And then, so critical lifts and then site specific orientations and trainings, right? What are we talking about a lot of times? Our site specifics, right? That we may take. We may go take our basic plus, or we may take safe land or safe golf, and then we may have to go take specific um, site specifics for DuPont, Exxon, Dow, right? Valero, Monsanto, whoever it may be. Okay. Either at the facility or the safety council, right? Usually it's at one or the other. Okay, good. So let's move on to 3.41, emergency procedures. What procedures do we have in place or must we put in place for first aid, emergency medical services, fire protection and prevention, and then hazardous materials also? So we have to take all those in consideration, make sure. And then also for emergency procedures for things like for rescue from extreme heights, confined space, trench collapses. So if we have a risk of any of those, we have to determine if we're going to third party a rescue team, or if we're going to have our own employees or fire brigade, right, or rescue team that we're going to have on our own facility. Okay. And then, of course, items like even in Lower Louisiana nowadays, right, we're not exempt anymore to acts of nature like tornadoes, extreme weather, items that normally a flood we know it's coming in. Obviously, or a hurricane, we often do at least, not always, but it could even be a flash flood. Let's say often, sometimes that may entrap us for the moment. But so we need to make sure that we take into consideration for all of those hazards as well. Okay. And then, of course, site safety plan also has to be considered, like we said, coordinated with other parties. So we need to have emergency lighting, for loss of any power, emergency reporting notifications, communication systems, like we said, a lot of times it'll wind up being a PA system with battery operated backup. Could be communication, two-way communication radios, and or cell phones as well. Okay, those are all, and you may have to go to air horns, bull horns, or whatever that's necessary. Okay? And then, of course, on-site medical facilities if we feel they're necessary, and depending how far away healthcare facilities are, right? And then, of course, off-site medical facilities as well, and coordinating with our occupational medicine clinics, basically like our OcMed clinics is what I'm talking about, or after hours, hospitals, emergency rooms, doctors' offices, whatever we need to coordinate to make sure that if anyone is injured, that they get adequate and timely medical attention. Okay. Okay, great. And then, of course, in addition to that, emergency assembly, right? Where will we muster? Evacuation rights as well. So let me go ahead and just show you. Let's see. We talked about that last week. It's EAPs, emergency action plans, or emergency action procedures. You know, a lot of times you'll see it, right? We'll have floor plans. We'll have emergency call information like this, who we need to call. You also direct us and tell us maybe what flow of traffic, that or exit signs that we know. And then, of course, also all the way down to muster signs, right? All the way down to signs like this, which will tell us where we must muster and where we must meet. Most of these signs, folks, a lot of these signs nowadays are going for that are quality of life are going away from red and going to green now. Okay, first aids, eye wash stations. Okay, muster and assembly points, even certain exit signs. Right. So let's see. You may have noticed them in some of your hotels like this now, right? They're putting them on the floor. So it's easier for us to see sometimes. So green basically tells us it's safe to go. Red often telling us there's an emergency, right? So right now they're kind of used interchangeably, but the more and more you see now that because of standardization, these items are now going to green. Okay. So if you weren't familiar, or the next time you stay in a hotel, look at a newer hotel or a hotel that's been recently renovated, and you'll see that most of your signage now is going to green. Okay, for life saving. Okay. Good. Okay. And then, of course, administration, right? Bulletin boards, newsletters, PA systems, right? Posting of our OSHA posters and our material safety data sheets. So let's keep in mind, folks, that we have to have in the workplace the OSHA poster must be posted, right? Any notices must be posted, and we must also have access to our material safety data sheets, whether they're electronic or whether they're paper copy. And of course, the preferred method is both. Okay. All right, good. And then, of course, personnel, right? Site safety plan has to include a section for training. How are we going to train employees? How are employees going to know what their responsibilities are? How are employees going to be advised of what is required or expected of us? So all of this will go into a communication plan and also into a personnel plan as well. And then preparing the site for the EHS plan as well. So basically, the site safety plan has to be prepared using the information that we've gathered in the pre-bid checklist, and then other tools. There may be a work site available there now already for us to inspect, or there may not be. Okay. And then typical sections are going to include things like site information, right? The layout we talked about, the scope of work, key contacts. Who do we contact? Who's the project manager? Who is the emergency service coordinator, right? Who is the fire chief? Who is the safety person? Who is the public information officer? So all different information that we need to know in case of an emergency. Any additional procedures, right? Any emergency response procedures. So as you see, there's a good bit of repetitiveness in these pages, but it's because it's items that we have to continuously work on and make sure that we have in our site-specific plans. Okay, and then of course, process safety management. For anybody who's not familiar with process safety management, what it is, it's the OSHA standard that protects employees when it comes to highly hazardous chemicals. Okay, the OSHA standard number, and it's in the general industry. It's 1910.119. Okay, and that's the standard number for PSM. And basically, the general requirements for PSM, this is what it's saying, is that if there's a host company, basically being, let's say, the manufacturer or the refiner or the property owner normally, okay, they have to pre-screen all contractors, All contractors have to verify that their employees are trained and that the task that they've been trained on the task that they're going to perform. The contractors have to inform the host company of hazards that they might bring on site. So contractors have to now advise these facilities that they're possibly bringing hazardous chemicals on site. They might be bringing, let's say, MEK, right, to do paint treatment or coating or as a cleaner. So methyl ethyl ketone, right, MEK. They may be bringing in different types of paint strippers or paint thinners. Okay, so just depend or other solvents. So just we have to advise the prime contractor or the facility owner of what we're bringing on site because it may react with something else that's already on site. Also, the host employer has to inform the contractors of any hazards that we'll be working around. So if we're going to be working around asbestos hazards or lead hazards, right, or excavation hazard, electrical, the lead contractor or the site person who controls the site has the advisors of these hazards, or employer of these hazards, and then our employer has to advise us of these hazards. Also, the host employer has the control contractors access to hazardous areas. Not everyone is allowed to be in a certain area, right? It's going to be authorized personnel only, and those personnel are going to have to be warned and trained and be ready to equipped to be able to work around whatever hazards they encounter there. And then also, contractors have to be informed of the site emergency response procedures. So, what is the plan? And that's why often you see that we take the site specifics, right, or the basic orientation plus. And then, if an incident involving highly hazardous chemicals occurs, the contractor rep they have to participate in the investigation. So, we can't say, oh no, well we don't want to be involved or we don't care. We have to be involved. We have to be involved in the plan and in the investigation as well. All right, folks, we're going to go for about another 10 minutes and then I'm going to get us a break. Okay. Um, and then you'll see there at the end of page 6.8, you'll see that there's some different summary review questions. Those are the review questions that I stated that everyone had been sent out already. I think some of the newer people haven't gotten them yet. I'll get them to you in the next couple of days. We're sending out evaluations now. The 15 evaluations, we're sending out the checklist for all the modules. And then we'll also be sending out these answers to the end of all the end of module questions for both books. Okay. All right. And then if you look at contractor pre-qualification forms, right? So let's just look and let me show you an example of a few items that we've been talking about right now. So here are some examples of some forms, and when we come back from our break, we're going to continue going through these forms. You'll notice that the next 30 pages are all forms, and it's basically recapping everything that we just talked about right now. Okay, so a lot of times employers or let's say a major contractor, a general contractor, a prime contractor for government, a general contractor for like oil and gas, construction or manufacturing, or maritime, or even contractors that have subs sometimes will often ask for contractor pre-qualification forms. And what they want to know before we even bid the price is, are we qualified to do the work? Okay, so here's an example of it, right? Company name, information, the main name of the officers, right? How long the business has been in effect. Is there a parent company, right? Is it basically a subsidiary of a larger company? Um, who's the current management? How long has it been managed by these groups of individuals? Also, the person who they can contact with any questions. Information on the government, on the business, right? Is it a sole proprietorship? Is it a partnership, a corporation? Okay. Percentage of ownership of the majority or the stockholders. Describing what services they can perform. Okay. Describe additional services that they perform as well. It's not just your primary ones, but also what else? What else? Perhaps there's an additional opportunity to bid, but also at the same time, if it's not on here, perhaps if all of a sudden they're doing that work, then we want to know who authorized them or qualified them to do that work. So it may wind up being an internal question for the larger contractor to why a certain company was either allowed or not allowed to do a certain piece of work. And then if you flip the page, you'll see it continues on, right? How are you going to evaluate your subcontractor's health and safety program? Basically, how am I going to inspect if I have any subcontractors? They basically need to go through the same qualification process with me. and then attach a list of any major equipment, right? Cranes, forklifts, powered industrial trucks that I may be using. Sometimes it include big machines like rig welders as well. Okay. Describe any affiliations with labor organizations. Labor organizations could be, maybe I belong to American Society of Safety Engineers, right? ASSE, or National Safety Council, okay? Or I belong to API, the American Petroleum Institute. So items that are really good for my bidding process. And of course, we want our contractors to be affiliated with as many um, significant associations as possible so that they continue improving their work process and their safety as well. And then company work history, right? Basically, almost like a resume for the company, right? Who have they done work for? Where have they done work? What were the results? Were there any recordables? Were there any fatalities, any incidents, any lost time? So all items that we normally see in the workplace, right? And then if you look on your right-hand side, how many man hours did we have in the last 3 years per year? How many injuries? How many illnesses? How many fatalities? What was our lost runs? Whenever you hear lost runs, it's kind of like your vehicle. Imagine, like most of us know with our vehicle, right? That they usually account for the last 3 years of how many parking, excuse me, not parking, how many traffic violations we've gotten, moving violations, and how many claims we've had on our policy. Well, workers' comp is kind of the same way. It's how many claims, but more importantly, it's how many dollars it cost, okay, overall or per claim, okay? And then in addition to that is have we been cited by any government agencies, the EPA, the DOT, OSHA, NIOSH. Okay, so have we been cited by any government agencies as well? And then, of course, you see their health and safety program procedures. They want to know, right? Do we have a written health and safety program? Do we account for manager responsibilities, employee participation? Uh, uh, Hazard recognition, right? Then do we have an accident investigation reporting program? Do we deal with compressed gas cylinders like maybe oxygen and acetylene, right? In the welding process, carbon dioxide, just depending, folks. And then, of course, do we do confined space entry? Do we have an electrical ground assurance program? Basically, a lot of times it's double insulated tools, making sure any generators are grounded, folks. That's usually your best examples of it. And then fall protection, housekeeping, injury and illness recording, PPE, powered tools and electrical tools. Also, unsafe conditions. Any reporting processes? Do our employees have the ability to report, let's say, unsafe or let's call it at risk, right? Conditions or behaviors. And then any type of waste disposal considerations, any vehicle safety programs, and it goes and it continues to go on. And I'll just run this through these last 3 pages, and then we're going to go ahead and break out for a few minutes, okay? So I'm at page 614 now, folks. Do we have a written program, right, for hearing conservation, right? So if our employees are required to wear hearing protection, we must also have a hearing conservation program. And this is an OSHA standard, folks. So just so you know, so it's not just here. It's also it's not just for us. It's for construction and for general industry both. Okay, so if there's a requirement to be wearing fall protection, there's a requirement to be doing audiometric testing. And for anybody who's not familiar with that, let me show you real quick. This is what I'm talking about. You've probably been in a booth before. You probably did it when you were younger in school as well. A lot of times it's a red and blue earphone, and they're testing with a small beep. Here's a perfect example of it right there. And they'll test our hearing to get a baseline before we even start the job. Okay. And then, if we have to wear a respirator, also it may be we may have to if we have to wear a respirator, we would have had to been fit tested, had to be medically approved by a health physician as well, in order to assure that we can actually wear the respirator as well. So this is all different. This is all different requirements that are being required by by OSHA, right? And then of course the major contractors are requiring it from us as well. And then the next one is the hazardous materials, right? Is the waste and hazardous material identification system. So do we have a waste and hazardous material identification system? Because what they don't want us to do is roll things in a roll off of garbage out of that site that maybe should have gone into a hazardous waste roll off, and we're rolling it off into a regular roll off, which is considerably cheaper. Of course, we all know it hinders the environment, and then it's very expensive if we get fined or penalized, and or if the host site gets fined or penalized. Okay. And then medical, right? Do we conduct medical examinations like pre-employment, pulmonary, replacement for job capability, right? Respiratory. So basically, are we doing physicals on our employees before they come in, during the job, post the job, depending, right? And then the greater the hazardous area that we're going into, the more of these physicals or examinations that they would have wanted us to do before we go in, maybe during, and then when we come off the job as well, to have a baseline and a final line. And then also, do we hold safety meetings? Who's involved, whether the employees are, right? Field supervisors, new hires, subcontractors. Also, how often are we doing it? Weekly, daily, monthly? Okay. Do we furnish PPE? Do we have our employees inspected? Do we have a corrective action process, right? So basically, if we find something wrong, we obviously want to correct the hazard, but also do we take a corrective action in order to make sure that it doesn't happen again with that employee or with another group of employees, okay? And then equipment and materials, right? Do we conduct inspections on operating equipment, like our forklifts, JLGs, lifts, which we must, it's required, and the different intervals depending on the type of equipment. Do we have a system for establishing applicable health and safety environmental specifications, right, for acquisitions of materials and equipment? So basically any hazardous materials or any hazardous equipment. Do we maintain operating equipment in compliance with the regulatory requirements? Basically, do we keep it in compliance with OSHA or with ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineers? Okay, is a perfect example. Okay, or with ANSI standards, right, depending. And then do we maintain any applicable information and maintenance certification records for the operating equipment? OSHA says we have to have these records. So therefore, the employer is going to require them as well. Or our contractor, right? Our client. And then subcontractors, do you evaluate the ability of subcontractors? Do you audit any of your subs that you have, including your group of people as well? Do you monitor their health and safety meetings, orientations, or verify that they've had them, inspections as well? And then our corrections or deficiencies documented. So we want to make sure that we document, right, any deficiencies, and then and equally as important, any corrective actions that are taken as well. And then number 42, craft training, right? Are employees skilled to do the work? Are welders qualified, folks? Are scaffold builders qualified? Do we have competent persons when it comes to working around, at least one competent person, if not more, when it comes to working around a scaffold, an excavation, confined space, hot work? Okay, so there's a requirement for us to have competent persons, crane and rigging. So do we make sure that they have craft training available? For anybody who's not familiar, one of the biggest craft training organizations right now, and is really a leader in our industry, is this NCCER program, folks. So if you go to the NCCER website here, okay, nccer.org, and then you can come where it says, let's see, I want to look for curriculum. Let's do this. Let me see. Training and certifications, and then right here, curriculum. And you'll see here, it's not just safety. A lot of us see the safety component of it, but look at all these different crafts, folks. Alternative energy, right? Applied math, boiler making, okay, construction technology, drywall, painting, pipe fitting, pipe laying, tower crane. We have a mobile crane right here, millwrights, okay. So I want you to know that NCCR is not just safety. Actually, it was craft way before it was safety. And there you go. And that's why they've got both sides of the puzzle, right? They've got the safety side and the craft side. So that's why I think we're all really beneficial for all of us to be doing this program. Okay. And then, so health and safety training. And then I'm going to go to 616, folks, and then we're going to break out for a little bit. 616, do we maintain trading records, right? Do we have a health and safety records retention program, right? Do we maintain the dates of training, the employment identification, the name of the trainers, right? What we trained on? How do we verify that the employees understand? A lot of times that would be assessments or workshops, right? Written tests, oral tests, different performance tests or evaluations. Okay, and then initial submittal information submittal also is all the information that they want us to check off that we're submitting as well. So there you go, folks. There's what was that? I think 5 pages or 6 pages, right, of a contractor pre-qualification form. Okay, a lot of times they want to know if we have safety meetings, right? Tailgates, how often? When's our last recordable? Okay, who qualifications or safety credentials of the safety personnel that we have. So those are all different examples of what they'd be looking for. All right, so let's do this, folks. It is now, let me see what time it is. I'll push this a little bit over because we started late. It's 10 minutes to 8. Why don't we do this? Why don't we take 10 minutes? All right, at 8, let's call it 8:02, 8:03, we'll kick back off, okay? Another 12, 13 minutes. And what we will do is we'll kick back off from that time. We'll push hard till 8 o'clock, and we'll push it hard. We'll push it hard till 9 o'clock in order to hopefully try to get out of this module. Okay, so the webinar is going to stay open. If anybody's got any questions, please, by all means, just go ahead and just message me in, or you got my phone number, just text me in the next few minutes, and then we'll jump back on in about the next 10 to 12 minutes, okay? Thank you. Kick it back off, all right? So welcome back. We are going to keep on going. We are at page 617, everyone. So that's where we're kicking back off now. 618. Okay. And there is an example of our pre-job planning safety checklist. And it'll be the general information, right? The type of job that we'd be doing. It would be the scope of work. Now, remember, this is more like around the bid process, folks, or we've gotten awarded the contract and we haven't quite gone out to do the work yet, okay? So this is where this will probably take place. You'll see examples there of the scope of work that's being done, hazardous processes, material and equipment that may be involved. Also notes the OSHA standard there again, the PSM standard for hazardous chemicals as well, for process safety management. You see there client safety rules and procedures. And just remember this, if you're doing work for like the Army Corps of Engineers or NASA, they have their own safety programs as well. Even though they're a government agency, it would be considered more client, for the reason being that it is through contract and not through law that we're doing that work. Okay, so when we contract with the Corps of Engineers, which covers any Corps like levee project, pump project, some roadways where infrastructure and drainage is going, and then also they also handle most of the military contracts, or the military falls under the Corps plan for civil contractors, is a perfect example. Okay, so all of those, and then like I said, NASA, it would all, even though they're government agencies, it is going to fall under the it's going to be considered more of a client plan than a government plan, because OSHA would be our government that's required. These other programs, like I said, US ACE, US Army Corps of Engineers, right, or NASA, those are actually contract because we've contracted with them, so therefore that's the only reason we have to comply. Okay, good. In addition to that, medical surveillance, industrial hygiene, monitoring requirements. What are we talking about? The monitoring of certain types of drug screening, certain policies for hygiene revolving around where there may be chemical or biological risk or hazards, doing air quality testing. We could be doing air sampling for biological hazards or silica, lead, items like that. Okay. Also, regulatory permit requirements and inspection schedules. So how often do we have to do it by law? And then also it'll probably get into how we're going to do it, or how frequently we're going to do it out of best practice. And then site location and layout, you've seen that over and over and over again, right? Is that basically we're going to have a brief map or an illustration of what the area is going to remotely look like, so that we have an idea for traffic control, traffic flow. That will help us determine where our muster stations will be, depending on, of course, wind direction and where hazardous chemicals may be, or seaborne materials may be in that work site. And then the description of adjacent exposures as well, right? Not only what we have on our facility, but are we around any waste management plants? Are we around any other refineries? Are we around any type of water treatment facilities? So just risks that we're going to have to keep in mind. And then, of course, utilities, right? Water, electricity, gas, sewer, any other. It could be something, it could be radiological, okay, infrared. So just depending, right? And then have all existing utilities been located and properly marked, like we said, 811, and then following that color chart that we said, right? The 811, let me go back to it, the 811 color chart. There you go. Going back to what I was talking about, depending on what utility it is what color they will paint it. Okay, good. And then, of course, field office storage, lay down areas, where we're going to have these areas put, right? We're going to make sure we designate the areas, make sure that they're accessible by truck, forklift, or crane, depending on what we're going to be using at the time. Don't have them too congested. And in order for them to be able to safely handle the material and operate and maneuver through there. Any restricted or congested road areas, let's describe it as well. It may be a road that may be kind of tight, where we may have to make it one flow of direction of traffic, right? Or one direction at a time traffic, possibly. And then, of course, parking facilities for employees, contractors, visitors, because we want to make sure that everybody's safe coming to and in and out of the job, right? And being able to get back to their vehicle safely or getting into the work site safely. And then any special requirements for temporary buildings with respect to location, size, material construction, to make sure that they comply with government standards, zoning requirements, client necessity, and our own necessities or requirements as well. Okay, it looks like somebody raised their hand. Was that a question or was that just accidental? If you have a question, just feel free to type it in, and I'm watching the questions just so y'all know. Okay. Okay. Good. All right. And then now I'm at page 621. We're at personal health and safety. As you see, PPE, right? What type of PPE is going to be necessary? And folks, look, just so you know, a lot of this also will go into the bidding process. All right, because once we start realizing how much PPE, and most pre-job assessments are gonna have a lot more material information on them than what this has, because that way we're going to know how many new harnesses, right, that we need. Do we need special safety shoes? Do we need any type of chemical or fire resistant clothing, right? Any FR clothing. So personnel nets, so that we can budget that price into the budgeting price. So what you're starting to see more and more now is that safety is being included more and more now in the pre-job process as well. Okay. What about temporary toilet facilities are needed? Will any shower facilities be needed? Just so you know, folks, all of this is in, let me show you where it is, okay? It's in the construction standards of OSHA. It's going to be, I think it's 1910, bear with me, 1926. I think it's .51, which is the sanitary code. Let's see, I might be wrong, but let's see. Okay, there you go. Sanitary code, okay? And if you notice, the one I went to Google, right? All I did was put in the standard number. It's just because I use it quite frequently, so I kind of know where it is. So 1926, but I can also do this, just so you know, because I want you to be able to get here on your own. You can just use the word sanitation. I think you can also use toilet. There you go. It's the first one that comes up, and I even misspelled it, right? And then I think you can use 1926 toilet. There you go. First one that comes up right there too. In a situation like this, you might want to just type in OSHA in front of it, so it doesn't pull up. Might be thinking 1926, the year 1926, and toilets made in that year, right? Like you saw some vintage toilets and stuff. Okay, so now I'm at 1926-51, and now I'm in this document, right? And that's like I've showed you multiple times before. I'm going to come here and I'm going to do Control F on a PC, on a Mac, Command F, and up here, if you notice on my screen, is a search bar, and I'm going to search the word toilets, right? And I've got 11 matches. Well, let's try toilet, 12 matches. So let's see what we have here. Toilets at construction job sites. Toilets should be provided for employees according to the following table. Here you go, folks. If you got 20 or less employees, we have to have one toilet. Okay? 20 or more employees, right? We have to have one toilet and one urinal for every 40 workers. So if we get to 41, we got to have two. All right, even if not, we can have one and one. At 20, by the time you get to 20, you're gonna have to get to two. You can have two toilets, or you can have two toilet. You can have two toilets, or one toilet and one urinal. Okay, and then if you get to 200 or more, you'll see it's at least one toilet for every one toilet and one urinal for every 50 workers. So basically, if you have two, I mean, instead of doing two toilets, like you can't count a toilet and a urinal in the same box as one. Okay, it's because not two people are going to go in there, right? So basically, when they say a toilet and a urinal, it would be a separate urinal. But the thing is, a lot of times in this, we know we're talking about portalets. So don't consider a portalet with a toilet and a urinal as one. Okay, as two. Excuse me. That would be one. Okay. Okay, good. And like I said, and then I could just keep on coming through here, up here. These little arrows right here, folks, they're called carrots. So this is carrot to the right, carrot to the left, and you can do carrot up and down sometimes too, okay? So I can just carrot through and look at all the references to the word toilet in this document, and that's how I search a lot of documents, okay? That's how I use it to pick up speed a lot of times. Or let's say if you call one of us here and you ask us a question, a technical question, just so you know that's kind of what we're doing. And then later on in the next couple of weeks, we're trying to figure out how to still show you now how to do it on an Android and how to do it on an iPhone as well. Okay. So we're trying to still figure out how we're going to record our screens where you to be able to adequately see it. Okay, great. So let me go ahead and move on now. So you saw the personal health section, right? And then it talks about what methods are we going to use to, okay, do we have potable and drinkable water, right? 6.21. Potable and drinkable water, and then what methods are we going to use to protect wall and floor openings as well? Like, are we using guardrails, floor covers, items like that? Okay, lifelines, cable systems or stanchions. And then I'm at 6.22. Any special scaffolding requirements? Are there going to be any scaffolds? If so, what type of scaffolds are we going to be using? We did this when we talked about scaffolds in the first book. Let me go ahead and on elevated work areas. Let me do it here, folks. If you do the OSHA scaffold e-tool, for anybody who's online tonight, shoot me a text. Have any of you, tell me yes or no, have you used this or not yes or no, used or not used? It's easier because if not, all I'll see yeses and nos. Tell me if you've ever used or not used the OSHA scaffold e-tool or any of the e-tools. What it is right here is, let me go to it. I'm going to the OSHA scaffold e-tool. Okay, they've got different ones. Let me type in e-tools right here and I'm going to show you. This is all the e-tools that they have for construction, logging, machine guarding, okay, powered industrial trucks, which is forklifts. We did the forklift course with that one, okay. We did the forklift course with that one. Right now, let me show you the scaffold one. And I come here to scaffolds. And basically, there's three types of scaffolds, folks. Okay, we talked about this, like I said, during the scaffold standard, but let me show you again. The three different types of scaffolds or classifications of scaffolds as per OSHA are they're supported scaffolds, scaffolds coming from the ground up. Okay, suspended scaffolds, scaffolds coming from an upper surface down. And the third one is aerial lifts, not scissor lifts, aerial lifts because of the boom. Okay, so those are the three different types of scaffolds. And then you can come here as well. You can come here to suspended scaffolds. Okay, and it's going to show you all these different types of scaffolds that are acceptable and are compliant. And it even tells us if we go to any one of them, let's say I'll go to this one, it's even going to tell us what we need to know for general requirements in order to make sure that it's compliant. Okay, so then you can start opening up each window. And if you notice, a lot of them even tell us where the standard number is on it. Okay, there you go. Okay, so each tab you keep on opening them up. Some are bigger than others, and it tells you all the OSHA standards that are related to that type of scaffold. Okay, so that's supported scaffold, that's suspended scaffold. Then we can go to supported scaffold. Here you go. A frame scaffold or fabricated, right? So it could be prefab or frame. It could be a pole scaffold or it's actually a wood scaffold is what it is. Sawhorses, which is crazy, but it is acceptable, up to 2 levels or 10 feet. All right, mast climbers as well. And then you also have tube and coupler scaffolds that we know are probably usually the most common. Pump jacks are manually propelled, or it could also be like a Baker scaffold or a Perry scaffold, okay, and a ladder jack scaffold as well, okay, with a pick board, not another ladder, but a pick board, right? So there's a scaffold standard. Check it out, folks, in your free time. I think you'll find some really great resources there. And then aerial lifts as well. And it goes on to tell us all kinds of different rules that we have to comply with when it comes to aerial lifts as well. Okay, so all that's there for you. Okay. Okay, good. So let's go back. Any materials or personnel hoist, right, or elevators. We keep on going down the line, right, of overhead protection. We get into emergency reporting and responses. You know, what's our emergency communication plan? Any outside numbers? Normally it's 911, and then any of the, which is acceptable, and any of the supervision or leaders and their phone numbers and contact information as well. You know, how we're going to handle first aid on site. You know, when do we send them to a medical facility? Do we have an on-staff nurse or doctor? Do we send them off campus? Just depending, okay? The name and address and phone numbers of any company physicians. Obtain information of, you know, on the client's emergency assembly area, right? Or muster stations, okay? And we'll get into what's on-site emergency notification, what's the process and the procedure, what maybe what type of signals or alarms, especially like in refineries, as many of you know that work in refineries. What emergency escape equipment is needed, who's going to provide it, that information, what offsite emergency reporting and response procedures are we going to use, the name, address, and phone number of all of the fire department, normally 911 again, right? But it's really good, like I said, to make contact, especially as the bigger contractors, with emergency medical and fire services and law enforcement in the area when we're going to be there for an extended period of time. It's really great practice. Fire protection and prevention as well, right? Is there going to be an adequate number of active fire hydrants on the work site? If not, are we bringing in, you know, pump trucks? Are we bringing in, how many fire extinguishers do we have? Okay. Do we have any type of firefighting foam capabilities? So we take all that into consideration. We're going to list the number, type, and size, and the locations of all fire extinguishers. Do we have any standpipe systems? Normally, standpipe systems is in building construction. I showed this to many of you last week. Let me show it to you again. It's called fire standpipe systems. Some of you may not know what it is, but I'm sure you do. You probably just didn't know what it was called. You'll sometimes see this on the outside of a building. Perfect example, that's where the fire department plugs in, okay? And then it ties into a sprinkler system. So basically the sprinkler system is not under pressure. It's just basically the tubing. And what will happen is sometimes there's a water pressure already allocated to it. Other times you tie into it from the outside. And what it'll basically do is it'll go ahead and run through all the floors through the sprinkler heads in the designated areas where they need to pop off the fire because the heat has basically melted the rods or the element in order to start extinguishing out fires. So here's an example of what a standpipe system would do on the inside. Right, the water flow is coming in from outside the building or under the ground, depending where the connection is, and then it's going to start feeding the sprinklers. The elements, the sprinklers, if they automatically open, they're going to put out and fire. They're not all going to go off. They're going to be regulated to the areas to where the element has been basically melted or activated. Okay. Okay, good. So let me go ahead and move on just a little bit more. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. And then, of course, administration, right? Who's going to be responsible for collecting and disseminating the material safety data sheets? Who's responsible for hiring site personnel? What screening and procedures are we going to use? Written procedures, reference checks, DMV checks, medical exams, drug screening, any other pertinent information and necessary information, folks. Just so you know, a lot of the information also, workers' comp also, a lot of times make sure that not necessarily that we have to give it to them, but they do make sure that we are requesting that information or that we're obtaining as the employer, just in case anything should happen and we should need to reference it. Okay. Okay. So let's see. Give me 1 second, folks. Sorry. Okay. And then, of course, new employees, right, or contractor orientation, how's it going to be handled, what types of safety inspections are required, how frequently you're going to do it. Like as you see, there winds up being some repetition here, right? But because we're now incorporating it into the actual forms themselves, right? And then special tools or equipment. Do we need any type of intrinsically safe or explosion-proof lighting, right? Non-sparking tools. A lot of times non-sparking tools will be made out of brass, or they may be brass encoded, okay? Air operated tools and equipment, any type of GFCIs that we need, extension cords. What gauge extension cords do we need? Do we need to go down to 14s or 12s or 10s? Okay, and what I mean is the gauge of the wire. The lower the number, the thicker the wire. Okay, so let me show you that real quickly. Okay, and basically this is what I'm talking about, folks. Here is let's say in your home, normally you have a 12 or 14 gauge in your home. Okay, 14 gauge in Louisiana, a lot of times it's on our ceiling lights. All our receptacles and outlets in our home and all our commercial plumbing, commercial electrical is a minimum of 12 gauge. Okay, so it's a little bit thicker, but the number goes down. 10 gauge, a lot of times is your water heater. 8 and 6, a lot of times is your air conditioner handling units. And then 4 or 6, I think most of the time 4 is maybe your electric stove, okay, or electric oven. So just like I said, the lower the number, the higher the gauge. Okay, I'm sorry, the lower the number, the thicker the wire for your copper wire and some aluminum wiring as well. Okay, so there you go, and there's just an example of what I was just talking about. Okay. All right, and then your phone wires, or at least when we had landlines, and most of us did, normally it's run with 22 gauge wire. Okay. Okay, good. So let's keep on going, and then special tools, right, or equipment, like we said. Let me keep on going. Extension cords. Let me go to an extension cord really quickly. Let me go to Romex first of all. For anybody who's not familiar, so let's say that gauge number that I just showed you. Let's say that a gauge number that I just showed you. Here you go. On an electrical wire, when you see that number, the 14, the first number refers to the gauge of the wire. That's a 14 gauge wire. And it says 2. So it's basically 2 wires being your hot and your neutral. The ground is not included, okay, when we're talking about it. So let's say here we're talking about 12.3 and 12.4. So you have 12.2 and 12.3. 12.2 has 2 wires in it plus a ground. So it's got a hot, a neutral, and then a ground. And then a 12.3 is going to have a hot, another hot down here, red, white, neutral, and then the copper ground. Okay, so let me just enlarge this a little bit. There you go. So hot, neutral, ground. This has got hot, a hot, neutral, ground. Okay, a lot of times we'll see a 3 like this, a 14.3 or a 12.3. They'll be run to like ceiling fans or lights, where one maybe your ceiling fan is run on one wire, one hot, and then your ceiling fan lights are run on another wire, and then both the lights and the fan both get the neutral and get the ground. Okay, so just to give you an example. But what I do want to show you is that an electrical wire, you do not count the ground, okay, when you see that number. However, an extension cord, and I have no clue why this is. I mean, I know it's standardized for a reason. I just don't know why, folks. And so let's say an extension cord now, what will happen is that the number will be, let's see, gauge. A lot of time, and then what will happen is this: on an extension cord, the number will actually wind up being printed on the extension cord itself. Trying to see when it's actually legible for us. Let's see. Okay, it's really hard to see. Let's see. Like, here's you see all that? That's all the numbering and the lot and the thickness and everything. But let me see if I can find one where we can actually read it, folks. Let's see. I may just have to go back up to this illustration. And what happens on an extension cord, folks, is that the number Here we go. This should be it right here. That's telling us it's 16 gauge right there. That's telling us that it's a 16 gauge wire. And I was trying to see if I could find, this is what I'm looking for right here. This is a 16-3. So it's a 16 gauge wire with 3. But the 3 in the extension cord now, where in the Romex you don't count the ground, in permanent wiring, in temporary wiring, we do count the ground. So this is a 16-3, which means you have a hot, a neutral, and a ground. Okay, hot, neutral, and ground. And that's, so in a Romex, you count the ground. So that's why that would be a 16-3. Okay, if it was thicker, it would be a 14 or a 12 gauge. Okay, but the 3 is because it's going to have a ground in it, because the wire is going to have a ground in it. Okay, all right, so good. So let's go ahead and move on. I'm glad we found one. Sorry about that. I didn't realize it was that hard to find. Okay, so extension cords and then air movers or any type of gas freeing equipment as well, right? Ventilation equipment basically is what we're talking about: fans, extraction fans, air movers, items like that. And then work permits required. Do we need any hot work permits, cold or safe work permits, vessel entries or confined spaces? Do we have non-permit required confined spaces? Do we have permit required confined spaces? We have to identify the confined spaces period. We're going to have to know what's confined space, and then we're also going to have to identify what is a permit required confined space for certain. Okay. Any gas testing, we're going to have permits for that as well. So any type of atmospheric testing with a multi-gas meter. Anybody who's not familiar with what I'm talking about, let me just go to, I'm going to do multi-gas meter, and then I'll do race systems. Multi-gas meter, this one I'm talking about for anybody who's not familiar. Okay, and normally what we do is even if we've determined, a lot of times we won't use it in the workplace because we've already determined and did the gas testing before the work got done or before employees came out. But this is normally the 4 gases that we read for. And if you watch the confined space modules for this, we went into this in depth. We talk about oxygen level being 20.8 or 20.9, which is ideal. H2O, well, let's see, in percentages is oxygen, and we also read LEL, lower explosive limit. We want it to be 0, but we need to stay under 10% for hot work. Okay. Preferably 0. A lot of organizations say 0 is the only thing that's acceptable. Both of these are read in percentages. And then parts per million, we normally read H2S, hydrogen sulfide, and CO, carbon monoxide. Okay. So just depending. That's a multi-gas meter though. And as you see, these are different brands, and most of them resemble each other. Okay. Of course, this is a multi-ray. That's a meter that I've used quite frequently. That's actually an older meter. Their new meters look like this now. Okay, but you see everything is pretty much, the housing's different, but everything else is pretty much the same. Okay, alarms, airports, input ports as well. Okay, so our filters. So there you go. For anybody who's not familiar with air monitoring equipment. Okay, anybody who is using it, please make sure that you actively make sure that you're currently trained and that you definitely know how to use the meter, because we've had way too many fires and explosions, I think, within the last year within Louisiana and Texas. Okay, but all over the country, but particularly in our regions. And then energy isolation devices. What am I talking about? I'm talking about our lockout tagout equipment, right? This one I'm talking about, right? Lockout, tagout. So when you go to the confined space one and energy isolation, we talked about this as well. Also in the evaluations that I'm emailing everybody, you're going to see, because we're going to do a couple evaluations on placing locks on electrical equipment, on breakers primarily. So you'll see that I've got all that involved, included in there, including some videos from Brady, which is the company that we use for the lockout tagout equipment for the assessments. Okay, so this is actually the kit that we use right there, that we use for the evaluation, and we bring it with breakers. Okay, or you come to us and we use it with breakers. Okay. All right, great, folks. So let's go ahead and keep you going. Let's see, and then of course the excavations as well, right? So, and then if you keep on going, 6.26 vehicle entry, critical lifts, which you talked about earlier, right? Over 75% of the rigging or 75% of the crane, and then or tandem lifts that we talked about, and then of course again, as you see, scaffolding again. And then any training requirements, right? Respirator training requirements. If you go back to last week's session and then our confined space session again, We talked a lot about air purifying versus air supplied respirators. So we'll make sure everybody's up to speed on that as well. And then remember, different cartridge colors mean different gases that we protected from, or particulates that we're protected from with air purifying respirators. Okay. Handling of certain hazardous materials like lead and asbestos, and those lead and asbestos folks are going to come with additional certifications through the states. So normally the EPA goes through the DEQ of each state, and employers are required, most of those for lead and asbestos in most states were required to do annual training on that, refresher training on that. Okay. And then hazardous waste sites. We're talking about response to spills and releases in medical hazardous materials, certifications for fork trucks, cranes, and man lifts. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking a little bit more. We talked about cranes already. We're going to add a little bit of segment or do an extra video on crane certification. So we'll make sure all y'all get it. We're going to post it on LinkedIn as well, since the new crane certification standard is coming out. And it's been out. Employers are being held to that standard starting November 10th of this year. So let me show it to you for anybody who's not familiar. You might want to write down this number, 1427. Okay, 1427. Let's see, crane operator. And that's 1926. 1427 is what I'm typing. What this is, folks, is the operator qualification and certifications. And then there are going to be 4 different options here of these options right here. There are going to be 4 different. Let me just go to my word search, Control F. There you go. Option 1 right there. Okay, for operators to be certified. These are for construction cranes, folks, not for general industry and not for maritime, although I think everybody should be doing it. Okay, it'd be a best practice. Certification by an accredited crane operator testing organization like NCCCO, American Crane Bureau, which works with NCCER. Okay, perfect example. The second would be having your own corporate program built and having it overseen by one of those types of accredited organizations. Option 3 is going to be the military. Where's the, let's see. Option 3 is going to be the, option 2, let's see, go to D. Here you go. Sorry, folks, I missed it. By the U.S. military, option 3, and then option 4 is going to be by any other government entity, state, local, or municipal. Okay, those are the 4 ways to be a certified crane operator come November 10th of this year, if OSHA doesn't push it back or the federal government doesn't push it back. And like I said, we're going to be doing an additional video on that, so we'll make sure that everybody gets that video for them. Not necessarily for your NCCER testing or evaluation, but for professional development. Okay. All right, good. So let's go ahead and keep on pushing, folks. I'm going to push this about another 25, 30 minutes. I think we're going to be good with this section, okay? As you notice, it's flowing pretty easily since we're doing all the forms, but I do want to make sure that I covered most of the bullet points, okay? And then reporting requirements, right? Reporting accidents, injuries, illnesses, fatalities, near misses, safety meetings, safety inspections, regulatory agency visits, right? Any other pertinent information. Remember this, basically, folks, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. There's no way we can prove or disprove it if we didn't document it. So just make sure that you document as much as possible. It's like I tell people, if we work today and we didn't do some type of daily activity report, right? We didn't do some type of audit, or we didn't do some type of check systems or emails. How do we prove what we did that day? Okay. So documentation is extremely important. Site security, right? Describing whatever security measures. Do we have control guards, right? Do we have security cameras, controlled access systems? What type of alarms do we have? Fire, burglary, emergency, medical, right? And then what about lighting? Sometimes we tend to work early morning, late evenings. So do we have adequate amount of lighting for the work to be performed, and also for employees to be coming into the work site, and for employees on foot not to be harmed? And then public liability as well. We doing any work where we're going to be blocking any sidewalks, driveways, streets, right? Any overhead hazards to pedestrians or the public? What kind of lighting, signing, barricades, traffic controls are we going to use? Okay. One word that I want to show you there that's not in this section, but we did talk about it in the first book. I think it was like module 4 or 5, which is TTC, temporary traffic controls. And this is what I'm talking about, right? Flagging, signs. Let's do signs. Cones, okay? Any of this stuff like this would be temporary traffic controls, okay? And let's do this. TTC means temporary traffic controls. MUTCD is Municipal Uniform Traffic Code Devices. This is basically the DOT. And they even tell us how we have to taper in lines, how many feet, what the sign means, and everything else, okay? For anybody who's not familiar, folks, let's keep this in perspective, right? The difference, and ask yourself for a moment, what is the difference between a yellow caution sign and an orange caution sign, right? All right, so let me give you what the difference is, right? In a yellow caution sign, this caution is temporary. That means that this caution, when the work is complete, this caution should be done. It's removed and it's gone, okay? Whereas a permanent caution, right? And here you go, folks. Perfect example. These are all permanent caution signs, okay? These remain in place after the work is done. These are temporary signs. These will be gone after the work is gone. Okay, so orange temporary, right? Yellow permanent. And then if you ever see these like this, folks, whenever they do down like this one goes from top right to bottom left. That means that you stay on towards the left of this. On the right hand side, on this one right here on the left, it means that when it tapers down to the right, that means you stay to the right hand side of the sign. So let me show you what I'm talking about, right? Let me see if I can give you an example. Right here is a perfect example. This one, you stay to the left, okay? And then if it went the other way, you would stay to the right, okay? So let's see. And I'll bring it next time you get on a bridge. You'll see this. Check out the sign, and or when you get to a T, and you'll notice that they'll either go both down to the right and down to the left if they go both way, or if the street only goes one way, they'll go down into whatever direction you have to turn. Okay, and then so those, and then also let's see barricade. Let's see. One last thing and we'll move on. Same thing with these barricades, folks. When these, you see all these are down here going from the top right to the bottom left, that's telling us that the lane's closed. We're going to go around it this way like this, okay? If it was turned the other way, if it was the other direction, and then like this, and then we'd become like this around it, okay? So just depend. Well, actually, that one's got two, so it's a dead end. We can't go in at all. There's nowhere to go in. Okay, but right here, this one we'd be going to the right like this and going around it. Okay. All right, good deal. So, did y'all know that already? Shoot me a message. Let me know if you knew that or if you didn't know that. Okay, we got 1 and 1. Okay, good. Okay, yeah, it's different things like that. We're like I say it often in here, right? We're way more standardized than we realize we are sometimes. Okay, okay, good. So let's move on, right? So we're talking about traffic control and lighting, and then we went to public liability. So moving on, 628 now. Um, environmental controls, right? EPA, what regulations do we have? EPA, right to know requirements, right? The public, what do we have to advise the public of? What hazards are associated that they need to know about? What about our employees? Okay, is there any asbestos or lead in the area that we may be anticipating, right? What training and monitoring are we going to have to do? Remediation are we going to do? Will there be any open burning or landfills or trash burning? Will there be any noise? Are we going to be creating any noise, water, air pollution hazards? Is secondary containment required for flammable or hazardous materials? When I'm talking about secondary containment, I'm talking about pans, like skip pans, right? Let me see. I'm talking about things like this, right? Like where we have these are some of your newer ones, some of your poly ones now, right? Here you go. It's considered a containment pan. Okay, if these barrels leak, they're going to leak into this pan. But the good thing about this pan that Uline is selling is that now you can come in here, you can forklift this pan, so you can actually pick it up, you can bind this together, right, or wrap it, and pick up that whole pallet at one time. Okay, so the pan itself also works as a pallet platform on those. All right, and then you may have something like this, right? Secondary containment pools. So just different ones, folks. Okay, you'll also see them like this, right? On different chemical cylinders also. So if they leak, they're going to leak into their pan. Okay. So secondary containment, because we don't want it in the ground and we don't want it in our water, right? And any type of runoff water either. Okay. In addition to that, also any crane hoisting or lifting devices, right? Or we're going to be using any cranes, or we're going to be using a tower crane or a mobile crane. So let me show you the difference, right? For anybody who's not familiar, tower crane versus mobile crane. So mobile crane, right? It'd be one like that. Might be on tracks or might be on wheels. So it might be a crawler. It might be a mobile. Okay. So there you go, mobiles. And then I'll pull up a crawler in just a minute. And then of course tower cranes like these, right? That we're used to seeing as well. Most people don't realize most of these tower cranes, this pedestal is less than 6x6. Okay, it's usually 6 feet by 6 feet or less. And a lot of people don't realize that they're that small. Okay. Um, let's see. And then where is the, let's see. Actually, I'll tell you what. Let me pull this up. Crane types, file type PDF. It's going to be this very simplistic. All it is hand drawings like what you see down here. It's actually one of my favorite handouts that I found online. Let's see where it is. Let's see if it's still here, actually. Okay, here you go. Perfect example, right? So here's a mobile crane, wheel mounted mobile crane. Okay, again, wheel mounted mobile crane, right? These two are boom. You see they're hydraulic boom. Here is your lattice work crane, right? So it's still wheel mounted. It's still wheel mounted mobile, but now it's got a lattice work boom instead of a hydraulic boom. Okay, and then we'll come into here you go. Now you got a crawler, right? So now it's a mobile crawler because it's on tracks with a lattice. Okay, and then all your different facility cranes, gantries, overhead, semi-gantry, walls, cantilevers. Shoot me all your trolley systems. Like I said, very basic and black and white, but I love this PowerPoint. Your straddle crane, right, or mobile gantry, whatever you want to call it, and then your tower, right, your hammerhead or tower crane. If you want me to send you the link, and then the derrick or a stiff leg, okay, depending which one you want to call it, okay. If you want that link, just shoot me a link, or if not, let me show it to you right here, just in case you want to take a snapshot of it really quickly. It's this one right here, the one about labtrain.noaa.gov. So it's a government agency, okay? And like I said, very, very basic, right? But I've always really liked that handout. Okay, so I'm moving on. I'm gonna leave that up there for you for a moment, and then let me go back to how I found it. Let's see. Sorry about that. Let's see. All I did was crane types, and let me show you how I got it to it again. I did crane types, file type, all one word, colon PDF. Basically, I'm telling it all I want is PDFs, okay? And there you go, right there. It's the second one, folks. Okay, that's the easiest way to find it. What I did is I told it with this control that the only files I want are PDFs. That's why all you see now are PDFs in my search. Okay. All right, good. So let's move on, right? So what kind of cranes are going to be there? Who's going to operate them? What type? Are we doing any type of critical lifts, heavy lifts, tandem lifts? What are the requirements for inspections, right? When's the last time the equipment was certified? Are there any planned use or prohibition of the use of the crane? Suspended personnel baskets. So, are we allowing personnel baskets being suspended, or are we not? Depends on the job site. What the corporate and client policy say. What kind of signs, posters, bullet putting boards are we going to have in place? Contract specifications, right? What do we need for bonds, right? For insurance requirements. I'm moving on to page 630, folks. Types of coverage, policy limits, right? Who's going to provide the coverages? Any special requirements? Any special endorsements that we need? Who needs to be on the certificate of insurance? The owner, the client, the prime contractor, subcontractor. Who's going to have to be on those insurance certificates? Name and address and phone numbers of any key insurance company representatives, the agent, the broker, the claims representative, loss control or safety representatives as well. And then any hold harmless agreements as well, right? Do we need any home harmless agreements as well? And then any additional information, right? Any additional information, and then of course there's our citable information on 631, which is where did we get all this information from? Okay, so all that is where you can find all that information. So let's go ahead and move on, folks. Let's move on to page 633. Okay. Okay, so here on page 633 now, right? What are we talking about? Generic safety plans. And there's an example of a generic safety plan. What'll happen is this, folks, is that you'll take this generic safety plan. I'm going to send y'all a link with the evaluations of a generic safety plan. And basically, this is what you would do. You would literally just start putting in the information, right? And when we do the evaluation, just so you know what we're going to do when we do the evaluation is that we're just going to grab a couple pages. We're going to give you a pen. We're going to say, here, we want you to start striking through what's going to make it particular to your work site, right? In the last two cases, we did either lockout, tagout, or excavations, and we don't have to do those. If you're more comfortable with a different one, that's fine. But since roughly about four of the evaluations are done around excavations, and we play a couple of videos for you. We send them to you in advance, these two OSHA videos, and then we do them again. And we talk about basically egress, right? Like safely getting out, safe evacuation or exit out of a excavation, types of equipment, soil sloping. So we have you watch the videos in advance. We watch them again that day. We talk about it. We go through the other work plans. The JSAs are built around excavations, and then we have you do when we do the JSAs, the job safety analysis and the task safety analysis. So by the time you get to your 5-minute tailgate safety meeting that you'll do with us, or you get to just tweaking the health and safety plan, it's so easy because we revolved everything around the same topic. Okay. But if you're not comfortable with that topic or you don't think you're going to use it frequently, and then, hey, we'll come up with another topic. So we have other ones we can pick from: welding, fall protection, scaffolds, electrical. So we have different ones we can work with anybody who doesn't think they're going to do a whole lot around excavation or scaffolds. Okay. All right, good. So this is what I'm going to do, folks, is that I'm just going to kind of roughly run through these pages real quick, and then I'll let you read these on your own at your own leisure. But let me run you through them for the next few minutes, just so you can kind of get a grip of what's going on here. Okay, this is a very generic site safety plan. This week, since we're at this point, like I said, I'm sending out the evaluations tomorrow. Between tomorrow, working this weekend too, Saturday or Sunday, even Monday. You're going to start getting some more emails from me. Many of you have already. The new signees will get many more. Okay, and you'll see that some of this stuff will already be on there and much more populated. Okay, so this is a generic plan. What are we looking at? One, site description, right? We kind of talked about that. It would be the date of when it is, or the date of when it's going to start, where it's going to be. Is it in Lake Charles? Is it in Orlando, Florida? Is it in Sweeney, Texas? Okay. What location, what hazards might be associated, any type of affected areas. What about surrounding population? Is it a sparsely populated community? Is it a densely populated community, right? What about livestock, animals, plant life, other manufacturers, other chemical facilities? Things that we want to keep in mind, right? So if you're in, let's say if you're in Lake Charles and you're Refinery Row over there, yeah, you want to note that, maybe next to you they're doing hydrochloric fluoride, right? Hydrochloric fluoride, or maybe chlorine, right? Or maybe oil processing or gas processing. So, things that may be informational because of what may be going on next to us, right? Coke processing, right? Whatever the case may be. In addition to that, also entry objectives, right? So it's basically as far as objectives of what may be in the area, right, that we could possibly be exposed to. Remember your whole seaborne suite, right? Chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear energies. On-site organizations and coordination. So, what we're going to be doing, project team leaders, right? Specific advisors, site safety officers, public information officers, safety officer, record keeper, financial officers, field team leader, and team leaders. A lot of times I tell people, if you go to, let's see, let's go to FEMA, ICS, Incident Command, okay? Let's go to org chart, organization chart. And folks, remember, anybody, I know a bunch of you, about half of you bought the books. So if you want to write in them, write in them. I mean, I still recommend probably making copies so you can keep them nice and neat when you really want them, or just in case you want to share them with somebody, right? And then anybody else who borrowed them, if you want to write in them and keep them, let's just talk. We'll figure that out, and then we'll just bill you the difference, or if you want to photocopy the pages, that's fine too. Okay, so for anybody who's not familiar, this is what an org chart looks like, folks. And basically, it's an organization by title, not by name. So what happened is a lot of times it'll be the incident commander. In this case, it might also be let's say the plant manager, right? Or it may be the general contractor, So it may be the prime contractor on a government contract. Okay, but this is basically any emergency, any material release, any homeland security issue, a hurricane, a tornado, an explosion, domestic or international terrorism. The Department of Homeland Security and FEMA after Hurricane Katrina, basically, this was already in place before then, but this is when they solidified it. And they basically said, this is the org chart that's going to be followed by the whole government from this point forward. Okay. And now, and because that way, this is where it winds up being now where there's more organization and everybody knows what the chain of command is, right? Who's in charge? It's the highest ranking person at the time until the whole ICS team can be brought together. And then at that point, it's whoever's been delegated to be the incident commander. All right, so here you go, folks. And then also on the side where you see public information officer, who's that? That's going to be the person talking to the media like we talked about last week, right? In chapter 7, since we did 5 and 7 last week, since it was shorter. And then, so chapter 7, if you go back and look at YouTube, if you missed last week's, the next chapter is already on YouTube, okay? And then a liaison officer, also safety officer. And then also in there, you may as well throw another box right here and you can call it human resources, right? Whoever's responsible for staff or personnel, because human resources is like safety now. We tend to be independent, just like all these other officers right here, like the liaison officer, public information officer. We don't fall under anyone else's chain of command, if you notice, but we also don't have any line authority, which meaning that we should report more to senior management, okay, even within our departments, right? So our department should answer more to senior management, although we may have a small chart like this that would also apply to our own safety office, okay? But we don't fall into any of these other sections. We're not under their direct supervision. However, they are not under our direct supervision either, okay? We are basically almost like in a consultant or coordinator position is what we're considered. Okay. So, and then of course, you see, like we said, on-site organization, and those names could be the names of people. They could be the names of positions or numbers, maybe depending on how they're assigned. And it could be, if it's people, it could be multiple people with the same role. Okay, with same person with multiple roles also. So you may have the project team leader and the let's say the public information officer. It might be the same person, depending on the size of the organization. Okay, and then if you look at your next page, 634, you're looking at different reps for federal, state, local municipalities, right? Contractors. We want to have everybody's information. On-site control as well. We kind of talked about all this earlier. And then E, hazard evaluation, right? What chemicals, biological, radiological, nuclear hazards do we have on site? Might be fall hazards, might be electrical hazards, okay? And then what PPE we're going to need, right? What PPE we're going to need, and also what level of PPE we're going to need. And this one, if you look at it, this is almost more of an emergency response, more for like a chemical release. That's where this one's going to fall more into, just because it's going to be a lot of hazardous waste and cleanup. If you go back to the first page on 633, it says it was for hazardous waste and cleanup. So you have PPE levels of PPE protection. So let's see, hazardous chemical, right? So here you go, folks. This is from the EPA. Okay, let me show you how I got there again. All right, hazardous chemical cleanup, PPE levels, all right, and we'll see. I think they have the images on it as well. And I went to the first one because it's the government agency, right? So we can, if you notice, all these right here are government agencies. Obviously, OSHA. Okay, I don't remember what NIH stands for. Apologize. I don't remember at all. Health and Human Services. Okay, Health and Human Services. So, but let's go back to the EPA one, and there you go. There's your level A, B, C, and D. Okay, there's your different levels, and the highest level is level A. Okay, which is the greatest risk. Level B, C, and D is lowest level. If you see how low the PPE levels are on it. Okay, and then let me see if we can get an image on it. I think they have like flow charts of it also. Let's see. There's a flow chart that's basically kind of telling us the same thing, but I thought they had some with actual pictures on it. I'm wondering if they took them off the internet. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can find us a good one and kind of get it to everybody. If not, we may just make up our own and get it out to everyone as well. Okay, but just so you see the what you call it that we used. Okay, the examples that we used. And then let me do the same thing with, because we're going to be talking about this with electrical. I may as well show it to you now. And folks, I'll have you off the line in 5 minutes or less, just so you know. Okay. Let's say arc flash, right? BPE levels. It's going to be by Cal. And here you go. That was for chemicals, folks. Now we're looking at PPE levels. And let me, it used to be 0 through 4. Now it's 1 through 4. And here you go for the most part, okay? Here you go for the level. And what happens in this one, in electrical, like I said, the 0 and 1 kind of combine together now. And what happens is, if you notice, the highest level is category 4, where it's a full arc flash suit, okay? So, so like I said, if you want to get to that one and you want to check out the PPE levels, I also did talk about it in the electrical hazard. I already talked about it in the electrical hazard session that we did a few weeks ago. Okay, so just go ahead and Google ARC PPE level, and you'll come up with all that. Okay. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and keep on going. So hazard level, like we talked about, suits, right? And then we're very specific. If you notice, specific protective equipment for each level of protection, right in the middle of page 635. All right, 636. We're going to go in. We start talking about air purifying respirators or air supplied respirators. Often we're going to be in air purifying, so we're talking about SCBA versus SAR. We talked about this last week. Let me go back to it again. SCBA versus SAR. Do y'all see how much stuff is actually on Google as long as we know how to actually search it, right? I mean, like I said, I spent a lot of time searching this stuff, so it's become pretty common to me now. But just so you guys see, you know, how once you start getting comfortable with the terms, it makes it a little bit easier to search. Okay, so here's SAR, right? Supplied air respirator, and basically it's being supplied on an airline, comes up to the waist, goes to the pack, and then goes to the mask. And the person will also have an emergency pack or 5-minute pack that they will carry with them as well. Okay, on this one, you absolutely have to have a 5-minute pack, emergency pack, on a supplied air respirator. There's no other option. The only other way you're going to get forced air is going to be through an SCBA, right? Something like this, like a scuba setup. Okay, and we'll talk about, if you look at the other one for confined space, and we're going to talk about it one more time in here, where this actually has to be positive pressure. It means it's constantly getting a little bit of pressure to the mask. So if there's a break in the seal or anything, it will constantly push fresh air out instead of letting contaminants come into the person. Okay, so so there you go. So SCBA, a perfect example. SCBAs are firemen that we often see it, and if anybody works in a refinery, I'm sure you've probably seen it as well. The good thing is this: is the tanks are no longer steel; they're aluminum now, so far less weight on an employee. Okay, so here you go, folks. Air supplied line comes. You have a 5-minute pack. SCBA, you carry all your air with you. There's no line. However, you may still have a 5-minute pack. The 5-minute pack or emergency pack. It's not 5 minutes. Is not always 5 minutes, right? It's actually an emergency pack. Could last 5 minutes. Could last more. Could last less. SCBA, self-contained. You do not need an emergency pack, but it's always the best practice. SAR, you must have an emergency pack just in case your line gets severed, cut, or the air goes out and you need to evacuate and get your way back to fresh air. Okay. Okay, and then communication procedures, right? Radio channels, horns, cell phones, right? Any type of telephone communications, decontamination processes, whatever you may need on page 637. Emergency medical care on page 638 as well, where it's showing all the medical information, first aid, CPR, hospitals, right, where emergency eye wash stations are, police, fire, and medical numbers. And then, of course, any emergency procedures on page 639 as well, okay? For a personal injury, right? Also fire explosion, PPE, and any type of other equipment failures. And then if you look at page 640, folks, personal monitoring, right? Depending on what type of personal monitoring we need to do, it could be air sampling of the environment, and then it could also be as far as medical monitoring for employees as well to make sure that they're not exposed. Let's say if we're in a facility where there could be chemical exposure. Some chemicals, as we know, can be acute, which means they can kill us or harm us now significantly. Many chemicals are chronic, which means that we don't necessarily feel it today. It could come on rather suddenly. It can often be delayed, and it winds up lasting with us, either being the thing that eventually kills us or ruins our quality of life until the day that we actually die. Okay, so folks, look, that's the whole. That's that whole module 6. Like I said, I knew that was going to be a big module tonight, and I knew it was going to be a big push. But of course, like every other week, like I said, I definitely like to throw in all these extra search tips and everything that we do. Does anybody have any questions for tonight? Any comments? Any tips? Okay. So y'all know I'm at dollar tips too, right? So, okay. Well, let's do this, folks. We'll shut it down for the night. This will be posted tomorrow, just in case you want to rewatch it or anybody else. We'll reconvene next Tuesday. We'll be back. Remember, we did module 7 already on Tuesday. So when we get together next Tuesday, we will reconvene and we'll start on module 8. Okay. We'll be sending some information over the weekend. And if anybody's got any questions or, anything, by all means, call me, text me, email me, whatever you need. Okay. And like I said, all these, as of right now, all these are on an open channel on YouTube. I don't think we're going to lock them, but if we ever do, we'll make sure everybody has access codes to them, okay? Not only while you're on the sessions, but even if you want access to them afterwards, okay? All right, folks, if nobody's got any questions, y'all have a great night, and thank you so much, okay? I'm sorry we ran a little bit over. Thank y'all so much. Okay, bye.